Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Redmen TV and your latest edition of Expert Insight. My name is Dan Clubb. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Sirhan from Physio Scout. You may well have seen him on Twitter. Sirhan, my friend, how are you? Okay.
I'm good. I'm doing well, Dan. How about you?
Yeah, I can't complain, mate. I can't complain. I wish we were here speaking in different circumstances, but
Yeah.
football sometimes dictates that these conversations need to happen, and this is one of them. Giovanni Leoni, it's been somewhat confirmed, not by the football club yet. We're probably waiting for Arne Slot to speak tomorrow morning at the time of recording at his pre-match press conference ahead of Crystal Palace, where he will probably be asked and speak about the Leoni situation, of course. But it does look as though some of our worst fears are about to become reality, and that innocuous, seemingly nothing fall has led to a torn ACL, and then will lead to obviously several months out. We're going to speak about exactly what that means, what that looks like, and all the rest of it around it. Yeah, before we do, listen, it probably was the worst possible outcome in terms of what just felt like just he kind of fell, bumped his head a little bit, and off we go,
Mm.
but it wasn't to be that. ACL
Yep.
injuries on the whole, Sirham, it felt like 15, 20 years ago, they were an absolute catastrophe for footballers. They're still really bad news, of course they are. But I don't know whether it's modern technology or the fact we've seen so many of them now. I think the way we view and the way we sort of talk about ACL injuries and footballers now has moved on and changed a bit.
Yeah. Um, I wouldn't say too much. So I would say the understanding of ACL rehab in itself has become a lot better. And like you said, like they are a lot more frequent, unfortunately, these days. And because we have so much more technology and therapists that actually understand how to rehab an ACL, not saying that they didn't beforehand, but it's just the more frequent it is, the more understanding you get, much like anything else in life. Um, and what I would say is like the headlining around it in terms of career ending. I don't think that was ever the case. However, because we have better recovery strategies, we're seeing athletes come back at a lot better and stronger levels. And yeah, no, I think people can come back after ACLs quite well now. I do agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And let's move on to the injury itself. And we've touched upon it there. It is commonplace, all too common, really. We don't know yet sort of the details and the magnitude and severity of the injury that obviously Leone's picked up. But if you
Mhm.
can sort of tell us a little bit about how it can differ and sort of the wording around it, because obviously there's different ways of describing. They could rupture, you could tear. There's all different sort of possibilities. And I guess what they would lead to in terms of the next steps, in terms of is an operation absolutely non-negotiable when you do your ACL, like all that sort of stuff.
Yep, yep. So I can sort of go through what happens and in terms of the different wording. So as we talked about, the terminology can be a little bit confusing because there are partial tears and complete ruptures as well as sprains. However, the partial tears as well as the sprains are probably less common. And a partial tear might sometimes be managed without surgery, but it really depends on the player's stability and function. But because of how traumatic the injury actually happens, a lot of the time this leads to a full rupture slash tear anyway. So ACL sprains, we can talk about that. That's usually termed as a grade one, right? So, and these are usually quite unlikely, and they lead to a recovery time around 12 to 16 weeks in elite sports. But again, I want to stress that this is really unlikely. And partial tears are sort of a grade two. So this is where only some of the ligament fibers are damaged, and others sort of remain intact. We can sort of go through conservative management, but what we usually see at the end of the day is these athletes with partial ACL tears actually tend to turn into a full rupture later on in their career anyway, whether that be 6 months, whether that be 2 years. And it's really hard to guess, but it usually leads to it. And we also have the full rupture, which is the most common one. And this is when the ligament is torn all the way through and no fibers remain connected. So what happens is the knee sort of loses a key stabilizer, which is mainly used for pivoting, deceleration, stuff like that. So as you can imagine, the knee stability just is it's completely gone. So and this usually ends up being surgery in elite level.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, then, I guess
Mm.
speaking generally, if the
Mm.
likelihood is that it is as you outlined there, the rupture, the complete tear,
Mm.
what are sort of the likely next
Mm.
steps for Leone? I imagine the surgery will happen somewhat soon. They'll try and get that completed successfully as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it really depends case to case, but we do see in elite football, they do sort of have a really quick turnaround. So within like the first week or two, in sort of general pop, we look at around, but like prior to 4 weeks, some research a little bit later now, but it's a quick turnaround, goes to surgery. He gets the graft, often from like a hamstring, quad, patella, and this ends up it starts the rehab process, which usually takes around 9+ months. Unfortunately for Liverpool fans, but yeah, so that's how it sort of kickstarts surgery.
Yeah, in terms of that rehab, in terms of sort of the next steps, as you've outlined there, obviously he'll be,
Mm.
off his feet for a prolonged period of time once the surgery's happened and what have you. But that rehab process of it all, like that, is that just in terms of like getting up and mobile again? That it's not like in 9 months' time we'll be ready to sort of run around and play football again. That'll be he can just operate as a human being and function in terms of walking and all that sort of stuff.
No, you can walk pretty much like without crutches in a couple of weeks. Yes,
Okay.
it is a little bit hard in terms of like full extension of the knee, and flexion. However, the 9 months time frame is usually nine is a little bit optimistic. We see Premier League players tend to come back at around 10 to 11 months. I can't quote the research study, but there is. And like players or general pop people, if you do your rehab properly, you usually end up feeling quite normal at around 3 months anyway, like a normal human being. But this is where risk comes into effect, and it's a lot when you do feel confident, you feel more mobile, and that's where your risk in terms of injury, re-injury comes about. But sport-specific training usually comes around 5 to 6 months. He gets reintegrated into training, reintegrated into games, and we'll probably see him at around 10 or 11 months frame go back into match football. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, in terms of sort of the timeline and the time frames around all this, I wanted to ask
Mm.
you, he's so young, obviously he's 18. This was Liverpool debut where this happens. Like he's just an absolute cruel end to his Liverpool debut. He's playing really well and it comes to an end in the
Absolutely.
worst possible
Yeah.
circumstances. But he clearly has time on his side in terms of getting back playing, in terms of sort of getting back to his best and reaching whatever his potential may well be in due course. But is the recovery process itself, is it an advantage to be young in terms of that? Like, will that potentially, how much can you speed this up is a question, but will that potentially help him in terms of getting back to playing sooner?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to stress that ACL injuries, we do see it happen frequently around his age. I don't know specifically what his age is, but I know he's really young, 17,
18.
18.
18, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so being young helps definitely in terms of tissue healing, muscle recovery, and the long-term outlook. It's very common for ACL injuries to happen at around this age. So there would be a lot of research or a lot of rehab protocols already set in place. And he has time on his side. Like much like anything in life, being young helps. But it's really important that we respect the body. So youth doesn't magically sort of speed up the actual ligament healing process. The graft still needs time to sort of mature and strengthen. So the medical team at Liverpool won't cut corners just because of his age. And as I said, like you start to feel normal at around 3 to 6 months, and the the ACL protocol in terms of return to play is usually quite frequently used. So again, we'll probably see him around the latter stages of 10 months. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And in terms of that sort of being fully recovered in inverted commas and sort of being able to sort of do all the things that you wanted to do, even
Mm.
that feels sort of the very difference from being sort of back on your feet and mobile and able to run and twist and turn and all the usual football movements. Even that to back playing and being part of
Mm.
match football, they're two very different things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We usually see players at the elite level return to training at around 7, 8 months. It really varies. It's very personable. Like they would have to go through plyometrics, so your jumps, right? Your sport specific training, your return back into training. And this can be stuff like just being on the outsides of a drill, passing back. And then you go into full pace training, and then you finally get integration into the match day squads. So there's a lot of improvement that you have to do prior to getting into the match day squads. But yeah, like you'd start off as a sub, then slowly integrate back into full games. But it's very also common to see that players don't come back to their peak performance, let's say, around 2 years after the surgery. So yes, he might be back next year, but I would probably say it might take some time. Some players come back bang and they're back at their peak performance quite quickly, but again, we need to respect tissue healing time. Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's an interesting point, actually. It brings me nicely on to my final question. 'Cause I think we've seen this, in the past, and Virgil van Dijk was a case study in this as well. It is likely to be even longer in terms of physically and being able to get up to speed and be the footballer that he once were and what have you. But I think a lot of this, and you'll be able to tell us better, is trust and having trust in your body and having faith that your body can do what it once did, because psychologically there's bound to be that mental barrier for quite some time in terms of like, I don't really want to go and do that movement, or you just don't feel like it's possible because of what you've been through. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also it integrates back into one of your previous questions. Like youth does play a hand in this as well. Like psychologically, as we all know, youth like younger people are a lot fearless and yes, he does have time on his side. So like with the backing of a full physio team and people really being anal about it, these athletes have a lot of what the general pop don't. A full physio team working around them, making sure that they're 100%. And because there's so many physios around the team, like they're not going to let them going back into training for no reason or if they have a little bit of doubt. But yes, it's a mix of physical and psychological stuff to get back into whatever it may be. But yeah, like my guess is in a weird way, it's actually a blessing in disguise that he's gotten injured earlier in the season because by the time he's back, he'll be ready for preseason next season, and then he could sort of ramp up his fitness. If he was to come back mid-season, it would obviously be a little bit awkward in terms of going back into games. But my guess is that he'll sit the rest of the season out, but be ready for preseason next year.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. Yeah, and Liverpool won't rush him back, as you've already alluded to. They'll be extra cautious with him and making sure he comes back at the right time. And Liverpool, unfortunately, have got previous experience of this. As I mentioned, Virgil van Dijk. We've had a lot of injuries along the way. Joe Gomez, unfortunately, has picked up some severe injuries and during his Liverpool time as well. So, yeah, they got past experience of getting players back up to speed, including after an ACL. And I'm sure Leone's in the best possible hands, which is something, and it's something to be sort of taken from it. If there are positives to take from something so unfortunate. So Han, thank you so much for your time. Massively appreciate it. Everybody else, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Take care. I'll see you soon.